You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of WebTrends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. WebTrends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm in discussion with Riaz Kanani, serial entrepreneur, CEO and founder of Radiate B2B. During the last 10 years, Riaz has been involved with many startups, but for the last 4, his focus has been to build and deliver a marketing platform. This is designed to allow business-to-business companies to target and engage with specific functions within potential clients. Radiate B2B enables companies to increase their brand awareness, promote relevant content to the right audience, and identify organisations entering the buying phase. Riaz, your profile shows that you've spent a fair proportion of your life in startups. What's the attraction, and probably as important, what are the bits you don't like?
Yeah, it's probably 2/3. I haven't quite tracked it, but it's certainly a large portion of my career. I've actually probably thought about this a couple of times over 20 years, I guess, or something, as to why I ended up spending so much time in startups. When I was 14, I guess, maybe even a little bit earlier than that, I spent a lot of time with my parents around business and that sort of thing, and really, it was more, my interest was in business and finance and technology, and I didn't realize it, but psychology as well. And so when it came to doing things, for me, business was almost a hobby. And so, 16, I was helping companies to build websites and figure out what it meant for business, and it never really felt like a job. And so when it came to then building out a business properly, sort of thing, which I did right through university and onwards from there, again, it just felt like the natural thing to do. I was at university and I applied for the big 4. I remember I remember that it was right at the time of the dot-com bubble bursting, and I think it was PwC were building out their new media department, and they wanted me to come in and build it for them, and it was a really meaty challenge and really, really interesting, but my life would have been very different had I taken that role and gone and built First Media, which eventually we exited to Silverpop, and it was a decision that probably made my life happier, I would have thought, because at that time, as I say, I didn't really sit down and think, corporate life or startup life. It was more a case of what was the most interesting challenge for me to go after, that I liked. I guess I was lucky in that sense.
So you kind of mentioned there that it never really felt like a job. Do you still have that kind of feeling? Because obviously in a startup, you do sometimes get involved in, it's a life, not a job.
Yeah, completely. I definitely know a lot more today than I did 20 years ago, in the sense of what it means to make that decision. The decision, when you're in your early 20s, you have very little responsibility. It feels like you've got a lot of responsibility, certainly relative to being at university. But as you grow older, have kids, have a house, and start to take on more of that type of responsibility, building a business is a commitment that is not measured in weeks or months. It's measured in years, and you have to be prepared to take that on, sort of thing. And so, for me, I mean, I think I said 2011. I said I'd never do another startup, and I didn't for a small number of years. In the end, the irony was an MBA was what is part of what persuaded me to go back. And since then I've done 2 startups. One we set up, and a couple of years later we shut down, and it turned into the current account-based marketing or sales optimization platform that we're building today at Radiate.
And I'm assuming that this desire, love of startups or building businesses has somewhat of an impact on your family life.
Yeah, I think that would be an understatement. I mean, I've always been very, I guess, business orientated is one way of putting it, I suppose. My wife actually is the same. She's quite entrepreneurial. She is one of those rare people who has studied fashion design and computer science, which astounds me still today.
Interesting combination.
Completely. And so she's she designs her own clothes. She has an e-commerce store on Instagram, and so we have to work together to make it work, basically.
It must be have been tough in the coronavirus epidemic if you're both doing pretty powerful jobs, both in the same building.
Yeah, luckily she has a full-time job alongside the e-commerce outlet. But she works in e-commerce actually for one of the big UK retailers, and so that's e-commerce is probably a good place to be at this time.
So which part of the phase of a startup do you like, and which ones do you absolutely hate?
So I'm not sure the exact terminology, but the way I think of building startups is sort of a 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100 sort of framing, if you like, where 0 to 1 is you're sort of trying to figure out the startup itself. You're building it out and trying to get a product market fit is what they talk about, I guess. And then that 1 to 10 is where you start to put in place all the operations, and then 10 to 100 is where you scale it up to a major organization. And I think the irony is so I'm very good at that 10 to 100 piece. I know that, and have done that quite a lot over my career. In fact, when I wasn't building startups, that's what I was doing from an operations or marketing standpoint. I think the bit that I enjoy the most is probably the 1 to 10, and then the 10 to 100 sort of time frame, where you're putting in place the processes and you're figuring out what works, and then you're scaling it and growing it. And I think there's 2 different reasons for that. So the 1 to 10, it's all about getting the product right, and I love figuring out how to make products work for the market. And then the 10 to 100 is really all about scaling people and scaling processes, which, if there was something else that I love, that would be it. So by sort of definition, the bit that I hate the most is the 0 to 1 time, which it's just hard work, right? You've got the idea, you're really passionate about the problem that you're solving, but it is a roller coaster ride. That you never have enough money to do what you need to do. If you could just do X, then Y would happen. But of course, you can't jump ahead too quickly because the market's not ready, and so you have to learn about the market and twist and turn. And of course, you're never in control of the market. The market is doing what the market does, and you have to chop and change accordingly. So I remember with one of my startups, we were building content curation, automated content curation for business professionals, and the market at that particular time was very much moving towards publishers. Um, um, that's where the revenue was to be had, and that was not a market I wanted to build a business in the end. But that was where I would have had to go, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's a very much a roller coaster. The great thing about Radiate has been account-based marketing is, it's continued to grow. The market's continued to grow. It's growing in the direction that we foresaw a couple of years ago, and um, that that makes things very exciting and very brings the highs with it, sort of thing. So it's always interesting when you build a startup because it's always different.
So interesting you mentioned account-based marketing, because in one of your white papers, I think you describe it as just good marketing. Can you
Yes.
just elaborate on that a little?
Yeah. So ABM, or account-based marketing, has been around for over a decade, and it basically says that for every prospect you have, you build an entire marketing plan, and then you execute on it and close the business. Now, for almost everybody out there, that's an impossible ask, because the cost of delivering that sort of marketing program is both prohibitively expensive in terms of marketing spend and also the amount of people involved. Um, but if you take the theory of B2B marketing, that is exactly what B2B marketing is all about, right? Is it's all about understanding the people, understanding where they are, understanding the timing, and you get all of that information, and you're able to execute on it. So that's why ABM is just really, really good B2B. Today, automation and scaling is basically allowing account-based marketing techniques to be delivered at scale for mid-market businesses up, sort of thing, selling to enterprise. And so you're able to think about how you deliver and execute your B2B marketing in a much better way than other strategies. And yeah, it is. It doesn't. I'm not. There's a little bit of a movement towards ABM is B2B. I think it is very much B2B for enterprise sales. I think if you're selling to SMBs, it's not yet something for you, but maybe one day.
So you mentioned 10 years there's been ABM. 10 years ago, I think you were at Silverpop. Was that at the
Yeah,
time of IBM or prior to IBM?
that was prior to IBM. So
Okay.
IBM purchased Silverpop in 2013, I think it was.
All right. So,
Um,
so since that time, all those 10 years ago, you must have seen some interesting changes. But one of the things that I think, having worked in marketing and sales myself, is this constant, I'll use the word conflict. That may be too strong a word, but this conflict between the relationship between sales and marketing. Do you see that has changed at all?
it's I think it's changed for the worse. I remember when so Silverpop bought a company called VTrends, which was a B2B marketing automation platform, one of the big three in the industry at the time, and the the sort of the goal, all these frameworks that started to get put together, so marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, all those sort of concepts were nascent, and at that time sales basically managed the opportunities, and leads were generated by sales and marketing, but for the most part the quality of the leads being passed across to sales were very, very poor. There was no framework, there was no real definitions, and this idea that an SQL and MQL were anything very different was anathema. It was they were supposed to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the as these platforms rolled out, companies got to grips with that, and the early adopters are often the companies that are setting the best practice and showing how it works, right? And
Yeah.
then it starts to evolve into the mainstream. And the trick is to try and make sure it's easy enough that the mainstream audience is able to adopt the same capabilities. And in reality, that never happened. Getting the SQLs, sales qualified leads, and MQLs to be the same just never really got implemented. And over time, you look today, and a lot of companies now are still struggling with the gap between those two. And if they're different, then as we all know, that basically that means your sales and marketing programs are not aligned well. They're inefficient. They're not performing.
And do you get involved with the companies that you deal with regard to trying to overcome those gaps or differences that are there?
It often comes up. We've turned away business where the sales and marketing teams were not aligned, because typically an account-based marketing program will fail when there isn't that joint alignment on the program. You very much, it's not about sort of marketing setting up a relationship and then passing the relationship across to sales. It's very much a case of sales getting involved earlier and marketing getting involved later, and then together looking over. It might be hundreds or even low thousands of accounts, but both teams are looking over those programs and making recommendations from their own framing. Sales and marketing have got different frames on the world, but they're both adding value to the overall program, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And do you think that because of this, I would say, wanting to join these two departments together, that perhaps they should report into the same head, say the VP of Sales and Marketing?
I thought about that a lot, especially in the early days of Radiate, where I spent a lot of time thinking about the future of B2B marketing. I still do today, and how the organisations will shift over time. So one of the really interesting things that we see is when clients adopt an ABM approach, they start to think about marketing in a different way, and that affects the structure of the teams. And likewise on the sales side, it starts to affect the processes on that side as well. I think I never ever really came to a definitive answer on whether it's the ideal to have a sales and marketing person jointly. There's if you can find the right person and get me to define what the right person is difficult enough, because I think the reality is that the type of person who is very good at sales is often, not always, not the best person to drive marketing. They're two very different sort of time frames in some sense. They're very different ways of looking at what's needed for a business. And so I think where I've got to is actually, I think one of the really big things that's happening in the world today, at the same time that ABM is sort of happening in general, is that sales is finding it harder. So traditionally, you would have a sales development team who were driving leads for the sales team, and you'd have marketing who were also driving leads for that field sales, right? At the same time as marketing is having a problem because everybody's creating a lot of content and everybody's doing the same tactics, and it's difficult to stand out. Acquisition costs are going up. Sales, the sales development teams are also having a massive problem in that the number of calls it takes to get through to people is increasing. The number of emails it takes to get a response is increasing. All the cold sort of starting conversation tactics are no longer simple, and they're requiring sales optimization platforms to manage these things. They're almost becoming like as sort of complex in terms of orchestration as a marketing automation platform. Mm-hmm. And so where I've got to today is I think you end up with a sort of sales team that is still focused on building relationships. You then have an operational sales and marketing team, which is all about breaking into companies, building relationships. They're not ready. They may not be ready to buy, but that's what that's all about. And that includes the sales development teams. It includes sales optimization. It includes marketing automation. And there's a phrase that I'm not sure it quite fully relates to what I've just said, but called revenue operations. And I think that broadly is where that ends up. And then I think on the marketing side, you've still got brand, right? And that's the bit that always gets missed. In certainly the last bunch of years, is the focus has very much been on generating leads and nurture, and people have forgotten that brand as a way of building awareness and building positivity, if you like, or affinity towards your business, can have a lasting impact on sales performance. And so you then end up with a dedicated marketing group that's looking after the brand side of the business. And so you end up with these sort of three groups. Now, whether that all ties into a single person, I suspect, again, if you've got the right person, yes. I think there's more likelihood that you'll end up still with a VP sales and a VP marketing.
Oh. One of the things that has changed over the years, and I think you probably have noticed it as well, is the way that we communicate with people is a lot different now than it was 10 years ago, where the phone was probably as important as any other tool. And I see that less and less now, apart from in the actual area where the client is looking to make a purchase, because it's more about inbound marketing, as you say, generating content and making that brand awareness bigger, if you like. So how do you think companies can make their content stand out compared to their competitors?
Honestly, I think the only way you do that is through something like an account-based marketing strategy. And obviously I'm biased. But
that wasn't a leading question, by the
way. The real problem is that companies come to you to solve a problem, right, or to
avoid
build
a loss,
something that is going
make
to
a profit,
generate. Yeah, whatever the reason is, but there's a specific reason, and typically that reason is big enough that there's going to be a bunch of companies servicing it, and obviously at the end of that you end up with a market of competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are writing content marketing, you have to address that problem. And some companies will do it well and write really great quality content. Others will do it less well, and sadly the majority will do it less well. From the buyer's experience, that means that the thing I think often gets forgotten is buyers don't spend a huge amount of time thinking about the problem or the solution. It's new to them when they're starting to come at it, and so when they start to do research and they look out as to what's available, invariably today there's a lot of noise, and they don't know who the players are who are good and who the players are who are bad. It's they have to wade through an avalanche of content and hope they hit on it. And in reality, they don't do that, and they end up. We've seen over recent years, increasingly companies are turning to independents to advise or get insight on the market before they start to reach out to vendors and engage. So conversion rates have been delayed. Conversions have been delayed. Usually, it's the second or third visit before they'll convert on a website today. And so I think the answer to your question about how can you break through is really only to personalize the content and make it relevant to each, whether it's a specific cluster or industry or right down to the individual company. Technology today, the reason we built Radiate is we have the data to be able to identify companies in real time. If you know the company, you know the sector. If you know the sector, you know some of the problems because you've defined, your ideal customer profiles and how, what are the framing that particular group of companies has on your platform. And so if you do that, you suddenly are able to deliver much more tailored messaging, which is in their language, which will naturally cut through versus all the generic content that's out there for the most part.
So where do you think the search begins? Do you think search begins at a Google search engine?
I think that certainly will always play a part because maybe brand plays a part initially with everything, right? So if you're in the SaaS space, almost certainly you've heard of Forrester and Gartner. You're going to go and check out what they're thinking about the topic. You don't need to do a Google search for that, but you might stick in Forrester and whatever the problem is into Google. So you will have companies that in your mind that you will go to, and that could be the Forresters and Gartners. It could be some of the comparison review websites, but it could be, and if there is a company that has stuck out in your mind over time as being a positive influence or something like that, then you could go to their site and check theirs out. So there is all that sort of, there isn't this nice ABC path. There's lots of different paths that are happening.
If only if it was that easy.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the job of a marketer, right?
Yeah. It's certainly much more complicated now and complex now than it has ever been, because I think that there are so many avenues to information, and it's trying to disseminate from the buyer's perspective. Is that good information, accurate information? Is it the best information? Is it the best product? Where's the trade-offs and things like that? So I don't envy any of these organizations that are trying to look for something without being able to understand their market position and their problems, but particularly because I think those are the things where people start. They have a problem because that problem has been identified either by themselves or by somebody within the sphere that's trying to resolve that problem.
That's right.
I think that's right. So just a few questions now with regard to the current situation and the situation moving forward. COVID-19 has had some immense changes in the way people work. In other words, we're working from home a lot more rather than working in the office. Do you think the future of business is massively different as a result of COVID, or is that just the entry into a natural evolution, which is just potentially going to happen that little bit faster?
I don't think there's any question that what we're seeing is a big change. The reality is that any sort of black swan event or unpredictable event has caused to make people make decisions rapidly. So to give you an example, if you wanted to roll out a program to have people work from home, you would go and do your research around platforms, you would check security, you would check capacity, you would test the platform for usability, loads and loads of steps that you would go through. You would probably have to talk to a whole load of people internally about the idea and whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, and everyone's got their favorites and their views, and you spend an enormous amount of time just trying to get enough critical mass to make something happen. And then suddenly something like this happens, and basically next week everybody's working from home.
Yeah.
So you've got to make that decision. And whilst that is the most obvious situation, decisions like that are happening across huge swathes of industries. You look at retail. There's no question that all the high street stores were looking at shuttering stores over the next 3-5 years. But because of what's happened, suddenly a lot of those stores are now having to be closed much, much earlier. So you've got all that happening, and so certainly decisions get made much faster, and that means things change much faster. But on the other side of that is that whenever there is change, there is opportunity, because gaps appear. So for years, uh, I remember right the way back in when I was at Silverpop, so that, it's 10 years ago, going to an online exhibition or trade show, one of the first ones it was.
Wow, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, it wasn't a great experience. There were sponsors, there were sessions, not very dissimilar really to today. The quality of the platform wasn't as good, but fundamentally quite similar. But they didn't really work because they didn't really solve one of the major needs, I think, of events, which is to actually sit down face to face, have a real chat, and the sort of serendipity effect of bumping into people, and people have to make a commitment to go to an event. There's very little commitment to go to an online event. Like there's an event that I won't name names, but there's an event that for me is one of the highest quality events in B2B marketing that I always try and listen to. It's over in the States, so I can't get to it. But when they came over and did an event over here, I made sure I moved heaven and earth to make sure I was at that event. Now they created that event, the US event, which is 10 times the size. They put it online. I think they had 10x, 20x the number of attendees. I didn't attend it, not because the content wasn't valuable. I have made sure I have got access to all the content that was created, but I'm drip feeding it into my sort of day to day as I go along, because there was no real incentive for me to block out such a huge amount of time.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that people now do dip in and out of content.
Yeah.
The attention span obviously has shrunk dramatically over the years, but I think people, so for instance, podcasts that we're doing now is a way of consuming content in a place where you were doing something else at the same time, whether that's driving or whether you're sitting there having your tea or whatever it might be. It's a passive way of being able to get information, but that's in a short bursts, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it might be, because we all now live what seems like a much busier world, that we can't leave enough time to be able to educate ourselves in the way that we used to. So we're educating ourselves in bits.
I think there's so much content, and there's always the chance that tomorrow there's better content.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so there's little, unless you have a real big need, there's little reason for you to go and spend a lot of time. If you're really interested in it, then that's slightly different. But when you've got a need to solve, then you'll go and search for it. But as a result, I think the events that have been really successful have been the ones that have brought networking capabilities to the online event, and added and made that part of it. I'm not sure they've completely worked yet, but that's what I mean about suddenly these technologies have come to the fore, and so tomorrow the world will be different, right? We'll be more online. E-commerce, there's no question, will have gone through a massive jump. It will almost certainly fall, but it won't fall back to the levels before COVID-19.
Just one last question, because we're approaching the time allocated here, and this is kind of a free for all kind of question, not necessarily with regard to what your history has been, but where do you think the future is with regard to businesses as a whole, or life as a whole? Is there anything on the horizon that you feel is going to make fundamental differences?
I love the future, right? I'm always interested in change, I guess, and how things are developing, and for a couple of years now, I've been more excited about the next 10 years than I have been about the last 10 years. The last 10 years have mostly been about building on an existing platform. So mobile being that platform for the most part, and mobile is a mature platform now, and what we're seeing as a result is exactly what we saw in the 10 years before that, which is the layers that were built on top of the internet, and so the next 10 years, I think we will see new platforms, whether that's advances in biotechnology, whether that's AI. I'm not a big believer. What I see today, termed AI, is I think still baby steps towards what's likely to come about in the next 10 years. Robotics, blockchain. There's lots and lots of areas of development that I think have got to the point where they have the ability to break into mainstream and create platforms where there will be huge opportunities for changing the way we live our lives, is probably a good way to put it, I think.
Okay. One final question, which actually brings me right back to the beginning of the questions that we actually had, is that you're obviously a little older now, and you're a little bit more settled, but do you still have a startup left in you?
I think Radiate is likely to be my last, but I suspect
You've said that
also,
before.
completely. Who knows? I would love to be in my 20s and build. Like, if I was in my 20s today, I would be building probably a biotech startup.
Interesting.
That's probably what I would do if I was in my 20s. Where I am today, there's zero chance of me being at the forefront of a biotech startup. It's the gap, I think, is too big. Once you've gone deep into something for as long as I have in marketing and technology, it takes a big opportunity for you to ditch all that and start afresh in a new area. Saying that, one of my favorite CEOs, Bill Nussey, has done pretty much exactly that. Right? He's he built Silverpop. He was the CEO of Silverpop. Obviously very deep in Martech, and he's jumped across to energy. And so yeah, I say nothing is impossible.
Okay, you mustn't let your wife listen to this podcast, obviously, because I think she's got to the point of one startup too many, perhaps.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. She's always been very supportive.
So. That's good. Riaz, thank you very much for your time. It's been very interesting and very stimulating, and it's a subject which is pretty close to my heart as well, obviously being in marketing and in sales. If I may, at some point in the future, we may pick up again and have an interesting topic about how the last year has gone. But thanks again, and hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, John.